Hello, hello. Today's horror story is written by KessalTheViking. Go check him out. Brutal bear attack takes another life on the mountains, heralded the Ridgewood newspaper. I had heard about the unfortunate incident from a friend of a friend. They claimed that some poor soul ran into the woods to say what they thought was a helpless woman, only to find themselves face to face with what they presumed to be a bear. Long story short, they didn't make it. I've always known that the mountains are no place for people, especially people who camp in mosquito-infested hell for fun. But that strange phenomenon is not exclusive to the mountains. No, Ridgewood, the town at the base of the mountains, has its own fair share of scary, old, and unexplainable happenings. The Carroll Street Phantom is one such thing, and I've experienced it personally. Carroll Street is a well-lit street that connects Romulus, the main artery through Ridgewood, to the suburbs. Tons of people take the street daily, and you would never say it wasn't traveled. However, something interesting is said to happen at night. To be more specific, at exactly 2:38 a.m., it is rumored that a ghost could be seen walking down the sidewalk. Based on eyewitness reports, the ghost was supposedly feminine in appearance, but none of them could recall any precise features. In fact, almost every person who has claimed to have seen it has gone missing. I say almost because a middle-aged man who has supposedly seen the ghost is still around, but word is he's not all mentally there anymore. Not since coming in contact with the Carroll Street Phantom. I work at a local pizza place called Millennium Pizza. If I had to describe the quality of the food, I would say it's a matter of personal preference. Anyway, before my own run-in with the Phantom, I had to deliver a large pie to an address I'd never been to before. The address was on Carroll Street, and the home looked like it had seen better days. As soon as I arrived, I did my usual routine of triple checking to see if everything was correct food-wise. I double check before I leave the restaurant, but it satisfies my mind to check again. After that, I walked up to the porch and climbed the steps. Ridgewood isn't a fancy town, and that means we don't use much technology, which also means we don't use mobile apps for things like food delivery. So I had to knock. But I only knocked once before the door opened. Standing there was a man who seemed exhausted. He was wearing scrubs that you might find on a hospital patient, except his were black. I started to speak, but he grabbed the pizza and pulled me inside with it. "Hey, what's your problem, man?" I exclaimed furiously. His eyes darted left and right before peeking out of a small window next to the door. "Did you see it?" he asked quietly. "Did I see what? You can't just pull a stranger into your home like this." "I'm sorry," he said in a way that sounded as if he'd suddenly realized the mistake he had made. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added reassuringly. "Yeah, that's a relief. Listen, pal, I'm sure I've got other pizzas to deliver tonight. If I could get the money and be on my merry way, I'd appreciate it." "Answer my question first." "What question?" "Did you see it?" He suddenly shouted violently as his hands gripped my shoulders. "And I asked what you meant. Get your hands off me." I pushed his arms away. "It's clear from your response that you haven't. Here's your money," he muttered while producing a $20 bill. I took it from him and he continued. "Keep the change." "Thanks." I tried to walk towards the door, but he grabbed me by my loose t-shirt and stared directly into my eyes. "What part of 'get your hands off me' don't you—"
"A word of advice. Don't go walking around here late at night,"
he shouted hysterically. He let me go after that. "Now can I go, or do you have some more ravings saved up for me?" "You don't know who I am, do you?" he asked curiously. "No, should I?" He studied me through his lopsided glasses and asked, "Haven't you heard of the Carroll Street Phantom?" "That stupid ghost story? Yeah, I've heard of it. Why?" "I think you'll find it's not that stupid. Since you've heard the story, have you also heard what supposedly happened to those who see it?" Listen, man, I don't really have time for this.
They go missing!
He suddenly bellowed and a bit of his spit caught me on my cheek. I wiped my face and donned a disgruntled look. So I've heard, what's your point? I'm still here, he answered quietly. Then I realized, wait a minute, are you that guy? The one who saw the phantom? And never disappeared. Yeah. Wow, they weren't kidding when they said the whole thing rattled your mind.
What's that supposed to mean?
Well, I assume you were asking if I saw the phantom earlier, and the answer is no. As someone who supposedly saw it yourself, you of all people should know that it doesn't appear until 2:38 a.m. It's only what, 9? Either your concept of time has gone out the window, or the story's a load of bullshit. You're wrong. Wrong? There isn't a specific time that it appears. The only actual rumor about the story is the so-called time of activity. I can assure you, it is very real and very terrifying. So then, why are you still here? And where are the missing people? I can't answer either of those questions. All I can say is that I've been hiding in my home for the last week, scared shitless about every sound, shadow, movement, you name it. I ran from the thing, and it followed me to my front porch. Since then, I've been too frightened to step outside. That's why I asked if you saw it. No, I didn't see it. My phone started to blow up in my pocket. I knew that I'd been gone too long and that my manager was messaging me about the delivery. I have to go though, so don't go missing. I don't really know what to say or what you want me to say. I want you to remember my name, Maxwell Hardy. If I go missing, make sure you tell everyone that the phantom is real and that I, like many others, fell victim to it. Yeah, sure thing, dude. Anyway, I gotta go. Take care. Maxwell said nothing and instead turned to peer out the door next to his front window. I opened it and quickly left, eager to get away from one of the weirdest situations I had ever been in. I drove back to work and my manager gave me the usual spiel about how time is money and all that. I told her that the customer I had wanted to give me his life story, and she claimed to understand. I didn't really get in trouble, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Maxwell said. Well, not so much what he said, but how he was saying it. He had genuine fear in his voice, as if he truly believed what he was telling me. I ended up having to go back out again for another delivery somewhat close to Maxwell's house. Apparently, it was a popular night for pizza on Carroll Street. As I drove past his house, I noticed something, or should I say, someone. Standing on his porch was a woman. She was facing towards the door, and she had no arms. Not visibly, anyway. I slowed my vehicle to a crawl and watched as the woman began to pound her head against the door. I thought about honking my horn to get her attention, but I didn't have to, because she suddenly turned around and locked eyes with me. Even in the darkness, I could tell I was her visual target. Unexpectedly, however, the doorway to the home opened up, and Maxwell stood in the doorway. The woman turned around and pushed herself into his home, and the door closed behind her. Perhaps she was a crazy ex or something along those lines. Regardless, I wasn't able to tell what was going on inside, and I had another pizza delivery anyway. So I drove on, but there was a deep-seated uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. About 20 houses or so down from Maxwell's was my next stop. It was just an average home, and after the owners answered the door, I could tell it was an average family having an equally average family night. They paid me, thanked me, and closed the door. The whole transaction went by so quickly, I wondered if I had even made a delivery at all. The empty pizza carrier in my hand suggested I had, so I turned around and began to walk back to my car. But I noticed something. Something far off in the distance. Approaching. I squinted my eyes. The lamplight along the streets is enough to illuminate hazardly parked vehicles on the side of the road, but often not enough to brighten the sidewalks. I stood by the driver's door and tried to make out what I was seeing. It stumbled. Whatever it was couldn't seem to walk properly. I chuckled to myself and thought, must be someone who partied a bit too hard. Still, they approached, but were probably 15 or so houses back the way I came, and I wasn't going to wait till they got closer. I got in my car and turned around to drive back to work. It was closing time soon, and I needed to clock out. But the moment I drove past the person on the sidewalk, I felt my skin rise as a disturbing shudder flowed through my body. The person walking towards me was the same woman banging her head against Maxwell's door. Her body turned the passing of my vehicle, and for one brief instant, she stepped into the light enough for me to see what she looked like. Her knees were locked together, so she walked with a certain awkwardness. She definitely had no arms. I could really see now that she wore a tattered white dress stained in red. Her face, however, was something unlike anything I'd ever seen. Her lower jaw was stretched downwards to form a perpetual screaming expression, and the skin dangled while she walked. There were 2 obvious black holes where her eyes should go as well. And worst of all, based on how she was acting and reacting, I surmised she was following me. I kept driving though. I'm not an idiot. I'm not going to stop and plunge myself into some cliche horror trope where I'm the unlucky main character. Nevertheless, I was still terrified and I couldn't stop checking my mirrors all the way back to the restaurant. Later that night, I got back to my flat where I was thankful my 3 roommates were home and awake. I told all of them what happened and of course they didn't believe me. They came to a general consensus of, must be exhausted from work, and I obviously disagreed, but my protests fell on deaf ears. I spent the night in my room, thinking about what had happened and worrying about my next shift at work. Luckily, I had 2 days off, so I was grateful for that. The next day, however, something weird happened. I was standing in the kitchen, perusing the cupboards for a snack. It was about 8 or so at night by then. 2 of my roommates were in the living room adjacent to the kitchen, and the third was in their room. Suddenly, there was a resounding pound against the front door. Both of my roommates, who were in the living room, turned to look at the door. I approached the door, and another pound slammed against it. And I thought it was strange that whoever wanted our attention would only pound singularly and not in succession like a regular knock. I looked through the peephole, and one of my roommates whispered, "Who is it?" No one was standing on the other side, though. "Nobody, I guess. Maybe they got the wrong house?" "Huh?" muttered the same roommate. Although it was strange, everyone just forgot about it. The following day, I had to drop one of my roommates off. Their car was being worked on. I left my room and walked downstairs to the kitchen to wait for them to get ready. While I was sitting at the table, I overheard the news on the TV.
Another disappearance in Ridgewood. This time it was 46-year-old Maxwell Hardy. Maxwell lived on Carroll Street and was reported missing by his sister, who claimed she hadn't heard from him prior to a welfare check by Ridgewood police. We currently do not have any details regarding his disappearance, and much like the others, there seems to be no logical explanation. Stay tuned for all the latest news regarding everything Ridgewood related.
I nearly forgot to breathe throughout the entire broadcast. My roommate emerged from their room and asked me what was wrong with me, but my shock left me unable to speak. Finally, they approached me and waved their hand in front of my face to get my attention, and I snapped out of it. I apologized and said I just zoned out. After dropping them off, I went back home and laid in bed. One of my other roommates was going to pick them up later, so I was free for the rest of the day. But I did not rest easy. In fact, I was just wondering when the police were going to show up at my door, since I had to be one of the last people to see Maxwell. However, the entire day went by with so much as a text message. By that night, things were much worse. Everyone but me was asleep in their rooms. I was trying to sleep, but just couldn't. No matter how much I tossed and turned, I wasn't able to find the sweet reprieve of dreamland. Then the pounding began. It was fierce and vengeful, and despite being upstairs, I could hear it as if it were right next to my ear. I heard no movement coming from the other rooms, which meant the sound hadn't woken any of my roommates. That also meant that I had to be the one to answer the front door. As I left my room, I realized the true intensity of the pounding. It was as if a giant was knocking. I went downstairs and it only got louder. The pounding thrummed through my mind and rattled my brain like a terrible hangover. The pattern was never ending and grew harsher upon my approach to the front door. But like the night before, when I opened the door, there was nothing there. However, I wasn't going to just brush it off. I stepped outside and surveyed the parking lot, but there was no sign of someone having been there. When I turned around to go back inside, I did see something. On the outside of the door was a dark circle, and I couldn't help but touch it. The substance was viscous, but I wasn't able to tell what it was because the light outside was next to nothing. I went back inside and double-checked the door was locked before returning to my room. I stopped by the bathroom to check my finger and was horrified to see a deep red color already drying on my skin. I woke my roommates immediately. They were angry, but I didn't really care. I needed them to see the circle as well.
While they admitted it was odd, they all collectively agreed it was probably paint or something, and probably a prank by some troublemaking child. I argued against it, but they said we would deal with it in the morning. I had no choice but to listen, so I went back to my room and laid in bed for the rest of the night, unable to sleep. I had worked the following day, but not until later on. My roommate said they cleaned the door, but there was a dark spot left over. I did my best to get some shut-eye while it was daytime, since I felt safer, and I think I managed a few hours, but man, I was tired on the drive to the pizzeria. And as if I was some kind of celebrity, my manager was awaiting me with a barrage of questions. "Have you seen the news?" he asked in almost a shout. I winced from his obtrusive voice. "Hey, chill out, I'm right in front of you." "Yes, I've seen the news." "You mean the Maxwell guy, right?" "Sorry, but do you remember delivering there? To his house, I mean?" "Yeah, what's your point?" "Did you see or notice anything odd about him?" "What are you, the police?" "I'm just curious. It seems crazy that we, and by we I mean you, delivered to a house of someone who went missing presumably short after." "Well, it has nothing to do with me." "What's wrong with you?" he asked calmly. "You look like shit." "Thanks. I slept horribly last night. That's all." "I see. Well, I hope you're good to drive because we already have a delivery." "I drove here. I don't see a difference." "It's Carroll Street," he said solemnly, and my heart sank. "Oh. Yeah, so you're good to do that, right?" "Do I have a choice?" "No." "I didn't think so." I grabbed the pizza and stuffed it inside of the carrier before heading back outside to my car. The sun had set quickly, which added to that eerie night air feeling. I punched the address into my GPS and saw that it was a good amount of houses down from where Maxwell's was, and the opposite direction of the following delivery I made that night. For some reason, I felt relieved. I cranked my music and drove to Carroll Street. I even had the window down and let my worries and fears flow out of my mind. I reached the address with ease and made the delivery. It was a woman and her presumed partner. They seemed a bit tipsy. Perhaps it was some kind of anniversary night, but they were kind nonetheless. They paid me and I left without a hitch. As I threw the pizza carrier into the passenger seat of my car, I looked up to the side window. However, it was blocked by a body with no arms, standing within view as if it had appeared from thin air. I then heard a heavy thud against the roof of my vehicle and I began to fumble with my keys, desperate to get away. Body slammed into the side of the car and shook it violently. I finally managed to grasp the car key and immediately started my vehicle and sped off back to work, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles a minute. I took a look in my mirror and saw what I dreaded most. She was following me. In terms of my vehicle's speed, she was moving incredibly slow, but I was still terrified and continued to drive with white knuckles gripping the steering wheel. When I arrived back at the pizzeria, I ran inside. My manager asked why I was in such a rush, and I told him the truth. It sounded ludicrous, so he responded with laughter. I furrowed my brow and stayed silent. I sat in the lobby and waited impatiently. I wanted to leave and go home, but my excuses were not good enough, according to my manager. That's when I decided to look through the windows outside. Someone was approaching from across the street. I didn't want to believe it, but the moment they walked under a street lamp, my fears were realized. It was the woman, the Carroll Street Phantom. She walked with those buckled knees and her elongated jaw dangling with each awkward step. I ran to my manager and pointed her out to him, but he said he couldn't see anyone. I explained her terrifying appearance, and he told me to go home because I would scare anyone dining in. But that meant going outside where she was. And although her approach was slow, she had already proved her ability to walk long distance for the sake of pursuing someone. I grabbed my keys and sprinted out of the door to my car and got in faster than lightning. As I backed up to drive away, she bashed her head against my driver's window, nearly shattering it. I drove home, ran inside, locked the door, and then remembered I was the only one who would be home because everyone else was either working or busy. But I felt much safer here than anywhere else. I kept moving from window to window to check outside for movement. I must have done that for a couple of hours at least, but my lack of sleep caught up with me, and my yearning for sleep overpowered my ability to stay vigilant. I decided to go to bed, because at least my door had a lock as well, which added some extra security in my mind. The comfort that washed over me the moment I laid my head against my pillow was unparalleled. I did hear a bit of noise below me, but figured it was just one of my roommates coming inside. But now, I'm upstairs, alone and shoved into a corner, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. I hear immense pounding outside my bedroom door. I thought I was safe. My name is Ian McAllister, and if I go missing, make sure nobody forgets my name. Never forget that the Carroll Street Phantom is more than just a rumor. Thank you for listening. Well, at least everyone had pizza. All's well that ends well. And you can handle another horror story, right?